Okay, so Johnny, I wanted to apologize to you for something. I don't know if you remember this, but a ways back, again, where we live close to your sister and brother-in-law, who actually set me and my wife up on our first date.
Nice.
So everything to do with me and my family has to do with Carrie and Chas, right? But anyway, so you were living with them for a little bit before you got married. I don't know how early was that before you met Ruth? How long before?
It was like a 4-year period. I lived in their little basement apartment thing, and I babysat their daughter while they would go to work. I would
Right.
babysit her, and then I would go to school and then go to work, all that stuff. But anyway, yeah, it was about a 4-year period, and then I think I met Ruth right towards the end,
Okay.
like the last year or so.
Okay, gave you an excuse to move out. All right. So anyway, what I wanted to apologize to you for, there was one time where Elizabeth and I were over at Karen Chass's, and you were really excited because you'd just seen a movie and you wanted to show us something from it. And so I'd seen the movie before. It's Jacques Tati's Playtime from
Okay.
1965, I want to say. I'm probably getting that date wrong. I just remember vividly you bringing us into the room and showing us a clip. I think it was with Hugh Lowe inside that office building. You were trying to show us the slapstick and the way that he'd organized, and we
Yeah.
just weren't having it. Like, do you remember? Do you remember that
Yeah.
experience?
Yeah.
What was going? I know you were disappointed because I've done that before. You get really excited, and the
Sure.
person just is not involved. But what was
Well, I
going through your head?
remember I remember you didn't tell me you'd seen it already before.
Yeah.
So I thought I was like, showing it to you for the first time. So I was kind of like, all right, Darren, something he hasn't seen and I can show it to him.
Uh-huh.
So and someone had shown it to me and we were making a movie that was kind of had similar slapstick in it. So it was kind of like something we were kind of like trying to go by. And so that's why I wanted to show it to you. And the scene is when he's trying to, he keeps like adjusting the chair, the cushion, the seat cushion,
Uh-huh.
and he
Yeah.
keeps like, as he sits down, it makes a funny noise and all that stuff. It's just really funny and it's really well choreographed. But yeah, you guys were getting the humor, and you just kind of fell flat. And I was like, oh, they're not getting this, and it kind of was disappointing. I was like, oh man, I was so excited for you to see it because I thought you would just love it,
Yeah.
and you didn't.
Well, are you ever in a situation where you feel outnumbered? Like there's you can make a fuss over something, but you're like, well, there's too many people here that I'm going to have to fight. So there's like, again, the thing with Playtime, I think it's a masterpiece. I think it's a visual masterpiece,
Oh
and
yeah,
just the way it's organized is just astonishing. There's a 45-minute sequence in a restaurant where they set up all these gags and they pay off on the anyway, it's just a brilliant sight gag thing. So again, I'd seen that, but it's a movie that you have to invest in. You have to
yeah,
understand and see what's going on. But when you have something like that, when you just bring somebody into a room, the way that our minds work now, like it's like little bites, right? You want you if you walk into a room and oh, here's a clip from Seinfeld. Here's something funny that Seinfeld said to George, right? You're going to get that and it's going to be funny. I think when you bring somebody into a room and let's watch this, and there's no setup and again you're just having fun and it's a party, it's hard to get into that mindset, but I've always felt bad about that. And again, there's influences in the movie we're going to talk about that were again Tati's The Building or whatever was an influence
all the
on some of
glass,
this movie.
walls and everything. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, yeah. So the modernity of it. So that when I was watching the movie, I just vividly started remember had that memory of you bringing us into the room, so excited, and then just deflating you completely because you just. Does that make sense? I just want to
yeah.
apologize that I didn't stick up for you a little bit more.
No, no need to apologize. I understood why you guys didn't get it. It wasn't the right time or place to show it to
Right, right.
you. But yeah. Well, thanks for apologizing, though. I
Oh
appreciate
no, you're welcome. That's fine. I gotta. It's off my chest. And welcome back to NostalgiaCast. I'm Darren.
And I'm Johnny.
And we are continuing our 90s bucket list season with Gremlins to the New Batch from 1990, directed by Joseph James Dante Jr., or Joe to his friends, starring Zach Galligan, Phoebe Cates, John Glover, Robert Prosky, Robert Picardo, who we talked about briefly in our previous episode, Total Recall. Obviously, you've got, what are some of the Christopher Lee's in there, Dick
Yeah.
Miller. A Dante staple, Getty Watanabe. I really like seeing him, stuff like anyway, and a bunch of cameos. Um, So yeah, so again, Gremlins 2, there's a reason that I gravitated to this one, not just because of Robert Ricardo and that connection. Also, it's interesting we didn't mention that Total Recall, that it was the score is by Jerry Goldsmith, who
Hmm.
also did the score to Gremlins 2. Again, very prolific
Yeah.
composer. But what and again, we're bringing this back because we have talked about Joe Dante before and our love for Joe Dante, but in our Explorers episode, which had your brother-in-law Judd Harris, right?
It's
He
my
came on to
wife's
talk about it.
cousin. My
Okay,
wife's
oh,
cousin.
cousin, not brother. Okay, we brought him on. We talked about explorers, and we talked briefly, not as much as I thought we did. Like listening to the episode again, I thought we would have talked about Joe Dante a lot more, but we didn't. So I thought this would be a good opportunity to talk about Joe Dante and why he means. I know he means a lot to me, but what
Yeah.
is he? What does Joe Dante mean to you? Why do you like Joe
Well,
Dante?
Let me just tell you my history with him. Like my first experience with one of his movies was Piranha, and I
Mm.
was maybe like
Yep.
5 years old. My family was on vacation. We were at this like we were
Yeah.
visiting my grandma and grandpa, and we were like in kind of camping,
Hmm.
shooting guns and swimming and fishing, all that kind of stuff. And as we were like at the hotel one night, Piranha came on. And I
Mm.
remember like staying up. Everyone was supposed to sleep in my family. They fall asleep, and I stay up and watch the movie. So I
Yeah.
was this little 5 year old kid staying up watching this horror movie about piranhas, man-eating piranhas, and it
Yeah.
scared me. I didn't know obviously back then that it was Joe Dante, but that was my first experience with him. And then of course Gremlins, and then Explorers, which we talked about a little bit, and that's one that I watched with a good friend of ours, and I've always loved that movie. It was always
Hmm.
something that kind of like stayed with me throughout my life. And then the big one for me is Inner Space, and we
Right.
talked about it before in our podcast, but Inner Space with Dennis Quaid and Martin Short and Meg Ryan. I think just like their the chemistry and the combination with those actors and just the whole movie as a whole, I think it's just a funny concept, and
Hmm.
it always makes me laugh, and I can watch it over and over again and not get tired of it. So my favorite Joe Dante is Inner Space, but I do love Gremlins too because it's so funny, man. Like
Right.
again, I laugh all the way through it.
Okay, this might be another one of those episodes where we're going to try to contain ourselves and not just talk
Yeah.
about the gags. Maybe find more interesting stuff to talk about. Well, let me ask you though, Joe Dante, I would say that no matter what movie he directs, you can feel Joe Dante in it. Even though Explorers loses that a little bit, even though Looney Tunes Back in Action loses that a little bit, you can still tell that it's a Joe Dante movie.
Yeah.
Is there something that you like about Joe Dante in particular?
Well, we have talked about this, how some directors have like they have like a what do you call it? Like what would you call it?
A je ne sais quoi?
Sure, yeah, they have something and they put that in all their films and
Yeah.
you sense it and you feel it when you're watching their movies. I think he has that, and I think you always know when you're watching a Joe Dante movie, whether it has the puppets or not.
Yeah.
It still has that feel. So I think that's why I like him.
Right. Well, again, listening to Explorers again this week, I just wanted to be sure that we weren't repeating a lot of stuff. I mean, we could go into inner space, but we talked about that quite a bit in that episode. And who knows, we might revisit inner space as an actual episode in the
Yeah, maybe.
future because, Joe Dante's worth talking about. But the thing about Joe Dante is, like you said, he has that certain something about him, right? And he came from the Roger Corman school. Again, that's where Scorsese came from. That's where Coppola came from. Corman who recently died, I think last year, just had a huge impact on a lot of filmmakers. And I think he hired Dante as an editor or a trailer editor, something like that. And he kind of worked his way up. But even at a young age, like Dante wanted to be a cartoonist. He wanted to draw. Even though his dad wanted him to be in sports, he just wanted to be more of an entertainer. And then when he was in high school, or what school did he attend? The Philadelphia College of Art. He decided that he wanted to go into movies. It's something that he wanted to do. But like our 70s season, like Spielberg, Coppola, and Scorsese, there's a love when you watch their movies, right? We talked about this ad nauseum. There's a love that they have for movies that you can feel when you're watching their movies.
Yeah,
And I think Joe Dante has that same thing, but I think Joe Dante is more of a surface level. He's more of a kidder and a prankster. He doesn't like a Spielberg movie can move me to tears, right? A Coppola movie can and a Scorsese movie can shake us in the way that a movie's made and the power of that, right? Star Wars is a completely different thing. I think Dante he has that Looney Tunes anarchic spirit. Like Looney Tunes is all over his work. And as a kid that grew up on Looney Tunes, that's like catnip to me. And I can feel
yeah,
that. I just have such joy watching a Dante movie. And when we talked about Explorers, the thing that was depressing about that is, yeah, it had that fun in the beginning, but as soon as it got on that ship, I didn't feel that. I felt like he was just spinning his wheels, and that's really
Mm.
disappointing for a Dante movie. I mean, do you remember that
I do remember
conversation?
that, and I remember it lasting a long time. I think I said I fell asleep because it got
Yeah.
kind of boring.
Right. And you left and you came back, I think stuff like that. And so you had to
Yeah.
keep watching it. But yeah, just really interminable. Just it wasn't building to anything. I think Inner Space is his most solid. That's his masterwork. It's just beginning, it has something to say and it says it well. Again, my first experience was Piranha, just like you. And it's a spoof. Again, it has a lot of humor. It's spoofing on Jaws. It is a blatant Jaws ripoff to the point where Universal decided they wanted to, I think New World Cinemas released Piranha. Universal wanted to put a stop to Piranha being released because they thought it was like making fun of Jaws. And Steven Spielberg, of all people, got that it was spoofing Jaws and it was an homage to Jaws. And so he actually stopped Universal from stopping the release of Piranha. I think that's how the story went.
Huh.
So obviously Spielberg had something, he had an appreciation for Dante because he got his humor. And so I guess the best way, like I said, we could talk about Inner Space, but we kind of did that a lot during Explorers. We could talk about Explorers. Obviously, we did a whole episode on that. We could talk about The Howling. But I wanted to see, let's just see right into Gremlins because I think that's the one, that's his, was his biggest hit. And it was a surprise to even him. But we'll delve into that a little bit. But what was your experience with Gremlins, like the first time you saw Gremlins?
I can't remember the first one. I was probably with some friends.
Hmm.
I remember just and always liking it, but I don't remember when I first saw it.
Right.
Probably at a sleepover or something.
Okay.
But I do remember this time I saw the second one. The second one stands out in my mind of when I first saw that. We were having like a family get together, and we were making nachos, and so like I had this big plate of nachos, and we were playing video games, and they popped in Gremlins 2, and the whole thing was everyone's all excited about how gross it was going to be because they'd already seen it and I hadn't seen it yet. So they're
Yeah,
telling me,
yeah.
you're gonna love it. It's so gross. There's so much, blood and guts and all that stuff. So I was like,
Right.
oh, cool. And I was all excited about seeing it. So my first memory of Gremlins was Gremlins 2, pretty much. The first
Okay.
one, not so sure when I first saw that one.
Okay. Well, I'll delve into my history with Gremlins 2 in a little bit. I just thought it was interesting that Gremlins 2 is the movie that I've watched maybe the most out of all Dante's movies. I know Inner Space is my favorite, but Gremlins 2 is the one that just has the rewatchability for it, and I find new things to laugh about every time. And it's funny because I've watched Gremlins 2 so much that Gremlins kind of faded in my memory. So I watched Gremlins again this week and I was surprised at how like gruesome and how nihilistic and how
Yeah.
sadistic it is on a certain level. And you were saying before we recorded, it's a horror movie, right? I mean,
Yeah.
what did you have to say about that?
Well, yeah, I mean, the first Gremlins was meant to be a horror movie. It wasn't really meant for kids, and then kids kind of latched onto it, and then it was kind of like, surprising to everyone. Well, oh, kids like these things. So then, well, I think you understand why when you see, Gizmo and the Mogwai,
Yeah,
they're just so cute, and so I understand that. But the Gremlins are meant to be scary, and they are in the first one, and it's really gross, it's really gruesome. But I would say they did kind of lighten it up for Gremlins too. It's a little more lighthearted, a little more fun.
hmm,
Maybe not quite as scary, but I would say it's still a horror movie because there's
yeah,
there's still some stuff in there that can be pretty intense. And if you're not, if you're too young or you're not quite, mentally developed, I guess, then you wouldn't get it. But because there's some stuff, especially when like the cocoons on the backs of the gremlins and they have to like, they burst open and new gremlins pop out and they're being melted and they're falling down and walking in all this goo and stuff. It's pretty gross.
yeah.
So I would actually argue that it's also a horror movie, even though it's a funny one.
Well, the funny thing is that Gremlins is the one that, along with Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, that was released that same year. That's what sparked Spielberg to say we need to create a new rating system because it's more intense than a PG, but it's not quite an R,
I thought
that
that
kind
was
of thing.
Poltergeist. Wasn't that Poltergeist?
Poltergeist 2 tied in, but it was finally around the time that Indiana Jones and Gremlins came out. I was like, okay, we really need to do something. And then Red Dawn, I think, was the first to be released with a PG-13. Anyway, so the thing that's great about Gremlins is, yeah, it's a horror movie and it's inappropriate. But kids, we talked about horror before, right? Kids love that stuff. Kids love being grossed out and scared. So, yeah, there's something to that. And the PG-13 rating is something that, when we were growing up, it's like I can get into a PG-13 movie. Like I'm not quite R, I'm not quite there, but I feel like I'm getting away with something with a PG-13.
Yeah.
And so, so it becoming a hit, I mean, it was a shock to Dante. Um, And I asked Elizabeth because again, Gremlins, like you're saying, you don't remember Gremlins like the first time you see it. I don't remember the first time. I just know that it's been a staple, like
Yeah,
Ghostbusters was a
exactly.
staple,
Yeah.
right? So it's just been a part of my life. And I asked Elizabeth, like, nobody expected this to be a hit. Why do you think this is a hit? And she said, well, it's because kids get scared. But the thing I thought was interesting when you listen to Dante talk, I guess in the original, because it was written by Chris Columbus, who went on to, again, director of Home Alone, the first two
Mhm.
Harry Potters. It was way more sadistic. I think they ate the dog. They ate Billy's dog. When they're attacking the mother, they decapitate her and throw her head down the stairs when Billy
Oh,
shows up. So it was intense. But even to the point where Gizmo is only in it for 30 minutes and he becomes Stripe. And that was in the original plot. And so when
okay.
Spielberg looked at it, and I was thinking about this today. We've talked about Spielberg. Spielberg has this unearthly, innate understanding of what audiences enjoy and what they're going to like. He looked at that and said, I think Gizmo is our star here. Let's keep Gizmo and figure out a way to make the Gremlins separate so we can keep Gizmo around. And
Yeah.
yeah, it's a mystery. Yeah, kids love grossness, but I think that Gizmo, the marketability of Gizmo, and how cuddly and soft and cute and adorable he is, with Howie Mandel doing the voice, all that stuff.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think that if you ask me, and I'll ask you, I think that's what really made it a hit, the grossness plus the marketability. What do you think?
I would agree with that. Yeah. I mean, he's obviously something that could become a toy, and you
Yeah.
could like market that. So definitely, I agree with that. Yeah.
Right. So again, I just think it's, like I said, unearthly that Spielberg has this understanding of what
Yeah. Yeah.
audiences will like. And without that, I do not think Gremlins would have been a big of a hit as it is.
Yeah.
Right. And
And it's
yeah,
also kind of fun to know that Spielberg kind of, gives his 2 cents to all these different movies, even though it's not like really a part of him so much, but he still like has his influence over him.
right,
So
right,
it's,
right. Well, Spielberg is funny because he stays out but he'll make suggestions, but the filmmakers are like, okay, I'll think about that, Stephen. Quick, we
yeah.
got to find a way to put that in the movie. That's amazing. That kind of
Yeah.
thing. You don't want to
Good
ignore
idea.
that. So
Yeah.
with Gremlins, it's a spoof of It's a Wonderful Life, right? It's you have the Deagle character who's like Mr. Potter. It's got that whole like the sunny, like close knit town, that kind of thing. Like the Tati playtime is an influence over Gremlins too. But again, I think the thing with when Spielberg made that decision about Gizmo, that kind of freaked Joe Dante and his crew out because they didn't have the technology to make a lot of this stuff work. But with Spielberg, I think Dante says in the commentary, there's a difference between dealing with the studio and dealing with Steven Spielberg. Because if you go to a studio and you say, "I have a problem, I need this fixed," they'll think, "Okay, we'll figure it out." They'll spin their wheels. You won't hear from them. When you go to Spielberg, he'll go, "That's interesting," and he'll make it happen, and he'll give you the change that you need to make
Yeah.
to help you with your story, right?
Yeah. That's cool. I like that.
But the what they did though, I like that Dante says that because I think the animatronics and the practical work in the first Gremlins is again watching it again recently. I'm like, this is still you look at Stripe and the way his mouth moves, I'm like, that is incredible. It looks like a living, breathing creature for
Yeah.
1984.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. I'm amazed when I watch it, like just how realistic they look. Even though it's a puppet, it's so realistic looking. The way they move and the way their mouths move, and
Mhm.
it's just I don't know, man. There's a lot to be said for that kind of filmmaking when you have practical effects instead of the CGI, characters that are all computer generated.
Right, right. And Dante says that a lot. The thing that I like, again, he's a prankster, right? He's kind of a goofball. Like when you ask him about CG stuff, I think they asked him, in a recent interview, what was your favorite monster of the last 10 years? And he says, I can't think of any because they've all been CG and they just don't have the same impact that a physical, like workable creature does. And
Yeah.
we talked about that in Jurassic Park. Like, yeah, that's a good mix of CG, but the practical stuff is what really sells it. And the CG is more of a to help do things that the practical can't do. But now
Yeah.
CG just does everything. And yeah, there's some people do it really well, but it's just weightless most of the time. Again, I just think that the animatronic work in that first Gremlins it still works so
Yeah.
well. And I like the idea you were saying something that even though the first Gremlins is a horror movie, it still has that funny stuff. The Jerry Goldsmith score, there's a montage where the Gremlins are eating everybody, and the score is like doot, 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 doot. It's really funny and it's not
Yeah.
sinister. So it's
Yeah.
telling you this is kind of fun, but
Yeah.
sadistic. It's sadistic fun. I just think that it balances that really well. But audiences didn't think that way, and so that's they had the pushback. The Santa Claus story. We'll talk about that stuff, but
So
it's
I wanted to talk about this real quick, the rules of
yeah.
when when they become gremlins because they're kind of arbitrary, I guess, because does it what if they're not in the right time zone?
Yeah. Yep.
after midnight. So something's always kind of bothered me. What do you think about that?
Well, I think Ebert said in his original view of Gremlins that it was fairy tale-ish, which again, fairy tales have arbitrary rules, but I don't think in fairy tales you're supposed to ask that, which is the big problem with the live action redos now because they're trying to delve into the reasons why, and it's like you're taking the magic out of it.
Yeah,
And we'll talk about it. There's a scene in Gremlins 2 that really plays up that whole idea of the rules. But again, if you're looking at it, there's a part where there you can see the Gremlins walking in the snow. Isn't snow water-based?
yeah,
There's a part you can see Stripe. He's watching the terror that's going on. He's in a snowbank and he ducks into a snowbank. Isn't that water? Like they're in a bar drinking beer. Isn't beer water based? Like there's all these little arbitrary, like you said, arbitrary, these little plot holes that you can delve into. But I
yeah.
don't know. It's about these little gremlins running around. There's a certain and the thing with sequels is once you make a sequel to it, that's when you start asking more questions, right? So I do want to talk about that, but you were saying something about even though Gremlins has some pretty grody stuff, there's the microwave scene, there's the
Yeah, yeah.
blender scene, but you were saying that Gremlins 2 is even grosser. What delve into that a little bit for me.
Well, I just thought like when at the very end when there's that whole, the whole mess of gremlins are having their little party, and then they're like, don't they electrocute them? They like shoot the
The electric
electrified gremlin
gremlin.
out into the
Yep.
crowd, and they all
Right.
like just fry and they just kind of bubble and boil up, and it's gruesome, man. It's like really, really gross. But same time, it's pretty impressive that they were able to, do all of that and make it, in camera effects. Is kind of cool.
Right. Well, again, the great thing about Gremlins 2 is I think it's probably the maybe the most subversive movie that a major studio has ever released. I know Dante said that a lot. And the whole story is when Gremlins became such a big surprise hit, Warner Brothers obviously wanted to do another one, but they couldn't figure it out. And Dante did not have a fun time like making. I know Tarantino has said that his opinion of the first Gremlins is Dante's kind of hates that became his biggest hit because he didn't have as fun a time making it, right? So
Okay.
he didn't want to do a second one. And so they Warner Brothers are trying to figure it out. Let's send the Gremlins to space. Let's send them to Australia, that kind of stuff. Let's do all these wacky, goofy things. And they couldn't get it. So I think around the time that Dante released The Burbs, Warner Brothers decided we just got to get a Gremlins movie out. We got to strike when the iron is still warm. And so they went to
Mhm.
Dante and said, the dream said, we will let you do whatever you want to do as long as you make a Gremlins sequel, right? And so Dante's whole idea, and so this is the main topic that I want before we talk about the gags and stuff like that.
Okay.
His whole idea was to make an anti-sequel, like all of Gremlins 2. And this is why I think there's pushback on Gremlins 2. I want to see if you agree with this, is because it's kind of making fun of the whole idea of sequels, right? Dante says that the first Gremlins ends. There's no reason to keep going with it. It's the end, it's the conclusion of a story. It's like you're not, as the Key Luke character says, you're not ready for this responsibility, right? It's just the end. You'll get there someday. But it's like Billy and Kate get together. They're going to have a family. It's like it's a growth it's a growth arc for them, right? The story ends. Why are you going to make a sequel, right? And so I said that Gremlins 2 at the top of the when we started talking here that it weighed heavy. My original plan was to do Die Hard 2 for this conversation because that's a
Okay.
movie that I've always wanted to talk about. But maybe we wanted to save that for a Christmas episode later. We'll talk about Die Hard some other time. But Die Hard is one of the ultimate. It's funny that it ties in because if you do a second Die Hard, you have to bend over backwards to explain why John McClane is now running into more terrorists. How many times, if you're just a New York flatfoot cop, are you going to run into terrorists in your
Yeah.
lifetime? You know what I mean? So
Right.
they have to add jokes. How can the same shit happen to the same guy twice? Like, oh, I did this before. They have to add all these jokes, these meta things to kind of ease up and help the audience go, okay, we're not supposed to take this seriously, right? There's
Right.
a difference between that though and a lethal weapon because Riggs and Murtaugh are going to have other cases, right? They're
Yeah.
cops.
Right. Right.
But Die Hard and then Die Hard with a Vengeance, yeah, you take that whole thing out, but then you have to introduce the idea of the Hans Gruber character, his brother coming in and seeking vengeance, and that's what gets John McClane back in the thing. That's what I'm talking about with these
Yeah.
sequels. You have to come up with some excuse to keep the story going, and it doesn't feel as organic. What do you think about that?
Well, yeah, because when it first starts, you wonder like, why are they in New York? Like, why would they suddenly just move? Maybe because they want to get away from everything and they want to start fresh or whatever. And so
Hmm.
you kind of question that. But then you're like, how is it possible that they happen to run into Gizmo again at the same place where they're now working in New York? You know what I mean? It's kind
Right.
of like so. But I accepted it right away. I was like, all right, whatever. It's a sequel. Let's just forget about that. Even though those were questions I had when I was first starting to watch it.
Right.
But
Right.
I got over it pretty quickly.
So the thing I was going to say, my first experience with Gremlins 2 was seeing it in a theater in New York. And again, we've talked about New York audiences are next level, man. They hoot, they holler, they cheer at stuff. I remember, like we talked about, I saw Batman in a New York theater. I saw the Emmerich Godzilla in a New York theater. The
Yeah.
Emmerich Gods and Batman and Godzilla, I remember walking out of the theater because the audience got so into it that I'd seen the greatest movie I'd ever seen. And then over years, like we talked about, Batman was kind of, oh, that was more marketing than it was an actual quality movie, which we talked about. And then Godzilla, I remember watching that at home going and watching it going, this is one of the worst things I've ever seen. What happened? Like, what's the dissonance between then and now? And again, it's the audiences. When I saw Gremlins 2, again, it was the same thing. My vivid memory of that, and holy cow, how brilliant is it that in the middle of the movie, Dante decides to melt the screen, which in my memory, because when you watch it now, right, it melts, but the gremlins pop right up on that white screen. They do the thing with the bunny rabbit and the Abraham Lincoln. It was so
Yeah.
funny and random. But I remember vividly when the screen melted in the theater, it seemed like half of the theater got up and walked out because they just thought that the screen was melting. And then, yeah, the gremlins pop back up. That's what I mean. My memory is a little bit different. It
Yeah.
seemed like there was a good 30-second or 2-minute gap where there was just a white screen, but then the gremlins popped back up and you were, oh, this is still going. People came back to their seats, that kind of thing. But the joy, Johnny, I know that you said that, and again, it starts out that way. It's arbitrary. Why, how are Billy and Kate in going to be in the same building where Gizmo's going to show up? How random is that, right? But as the movie progresses, this is what I think is brilliant about the movie. It gets crazier and crazier and crazier as it goes until the final shot where it's Robert Picardo deciding it's a good idea to screw a gremlin, right? It gets to that point. I just love that it snowballs. So yeah, it's arbitrary, but then they start poking at all these holes. They start making
Yeah.
fun of things. They start having, and so you're like, oh, I get what they're doing. Johnny, the joy that set in when I think 12, I was 12 years old. And once I realized what was happening and it was just a joke fest, there was just this sense of joy that just sunk over me. And I was like, this is one of the greatest things I've ever seen. I don't know. What do
Well,
you,
let me
you don't understand what I'm saying there?
Yeah, I totally get it, but let me tell you this. We have a channel on our TV that when we flip to it, it occasionally kind of like jitters or kind of like freezes a little bit, and then
Uh-huh.
just one channel. I'm not sure why that channel does that, but it does. So when I'm watching that channel, it kind of flips and freezes and stuff. And so when we were watching Gremlins 2, and it started to kind of like freeze up and kind of shake a little bit, I
Yeah.
was like, "Wait, what's going on? Is our TV broke?" Because I totally forgot about that moment in the movie. I was like,
Right.
"Oh yeah," and then it went white, and I was like, "Okay, this is supposed to happen." So the kind of I actually thought it was like my TV was going bad. But anyway, I want to say this too. Like I love that the movie starts with Looney Tunes. And
Mhm.
then like in the middle it has this whole like theater, everything in the theater that happens, and then just kind of ends with total mayhem. I don't know, I just love it. But
Yeah.
I want to talk about real quick, if I can, the Robert Malton, or not Robert, what's his name?
Leonard
Leonard.
Maltin.
Leonard
Yep.
Malton, yeah, Leonard Malton.
Yep. Yep.
Because him and Joe Dante are friends, and so he had to give a review, an honest review about Gremlins, and
Gave
so
it
he
two
did,
stars. Yeah, I
and
gave
he
it
gave
two
a really
stars
bad,
there.
yeah, 2-star review, and then Joe Dante casts him in his next movie to give the exact same review, and so to see little Leonard Maltin on screen, reviewing Gremlins. I thought that was so meta and so fun, and it's just, and then the Gremlins like attack him and stuff. It's just great.
It's a 10, it's a 10. Yeah, that kind of thing. It's
Yeah, it's
but
awesome.
again, I think it's funny because Dante kind of hates the first Gremlin, so he doesn't mind making fun of it. It doesn't hurt
Yeah.
him, right? And they're just having fun at
And
this,
I do
right?
like too when filmmakers put that kind of stuff in their movies. They put those little inside jokes, or hey, they can make fun of themselves. I like that.
Right. Well, this movie breaks a fourth wall, but is there such thing as a fifth wall? I think it breaks the fifth wall,
If there
right?
is, he wrote it.
Right, right, right. So again, there's like I said, it builds, it snowballs into something. It's not just one tone and then it backs off. It just builds and builds, gets crazier and funny until you're just laughing hysterically. All the rules, like all the characters and the plot mechanics, it doesn't matter because it's very Looney Tunes-ish, and Looney Tunes does not depend on plot. It depends on the gags, right?
Yeah.
So the thing that I really like, even though it's an anti-sequel, even though it's making these comments, even though, and again, the Abraham Lincoln part where she goes off and starts about how she meets this guy, and it's obviously they're making fun of that thing with the Santa Claus story, right? Which
Yeah.
is horrifying, but it's also really funny. Like I don't know how to explain it. The first Gremlins really walks that line, right?
Yeah. Because when she tells that first story in the first Gremlins about her dad trying to surprise her as Santa Claus getting stuck in the chimney and dying.
Why are we laughing, right?
I know, but it's so
Yeah.
funny. And
Yeah.
then the way she delivers those stories, and it's so droll and so kind of like, huh?
Yeah.
I don't know, man. And then he cuts her off, like, no, no, we're not doing this time.
Yeah, yeah, and you can tell Zach Galligan is kind of he's you can see him laughing. He's because he just it's
Yeah.
so funny. Again, I love that. I love during the part where the screen burns and then the woman comes out and said, "This is worse than the first one." I thought that was really
Yeah.
funny. And the joke even goes to the part where they put it on video instead of doing the screen melting. They have the thing where the screen gets the tracking goes off and gets all
Oh, yeah, yeah.
pixelated, and then it has the please stand by, and then they do this whole thing, and then John Wayne comes in, I think from Chisholm or something like that, and instead of Hulk Hogan, he tells them to get stupid gremlins get back on the right track. But then also in the novelization, I believe the gremlins take the author of the book and they lock him in a closet and then they start typing and writing the story themselves until the author breaks out and kicks the gremlins out. So
Mhm.
they keep that joke going like no matter what format it is. I think that's really great.
Yeah,
But
it's pretty funny.
the thing that I really love is even though this is an anti-sequel, even though there's that part, Johnny, where it's the technicians just nitpicking at the rules, which is what happened when the movie came out. That's internet trolls today. That's making fun. That's like you look at the movie how it has the archery channel, it has cooking channels, which were not a thing in 1990, and now it was a satire in 1990.
Yeah.
Now they're real. These things
Yeah.
exist. There's channels
Yep.
based around cooking, right? But the fact that these technicians are joking around and those are the Twitter people, those are the film Twitter bros that have to nitpick everything, and they're just horrible people. They're you don't want to be around them. And it's to the part where the gremlin breaks out and starts eating them. I'm like, yes, eat these people. Like these people deserve to be eaten. I think people look at that and they kind of don't like that they're being made fun of. Even though there's all that stuff, I really enjoyed how there's still a lot of sincere plot arcs, like character arcs in here, like the Robert Prosky character who's supposed to be Uncle the grandpa from the Munster stuff like that,
Yeah.
Grandpa Fred. They have Goldsmith plays the music where he's talking to Bill and he's like, I just want to be a real newscaster. I don't want to keep doing this. This is a joke. And then even it's still funny. He becomes a newscaster with the Getty Watanabe character, but
Yeah.
he's
Yeah.
still
Yeah.
dressed in a Dracula outfit.
Yeah.
You have the Futterman character, the Dick Miller character, and his wife. What's the wife's name? Jackie Joseph, who's really funny. He has the arc where he's like, you thought he died in the first one. I like how to
Right.
get out of the
Right.
way that he's alive, but he
Yeah.
has this arc where he's like, I'm not crazy. Like, I'm not crazy. Like, I've never been crazy. These gremlins actually existed. And how
Yeah.
funny is that gag when he's being attacked? First of all, the gremlin becomes a bat. It has the bat signal that breaks out, which is a big
Yeah.
hit the year before. That was my biggest laugh. And the first thing that it does is it attacks Mr. Futterman. Like that's this first thing. But it's also funny that the New Yorkers, obviously the gremlin wasn't there, but you watch those New Yorkers, they're more annoyed that Futterman is like getting in their way and like making them
Yeah.
go off their path. Then they are this giant gremlin walking around. I just thought that was really
Yeah.
funny.
Uh,
But he has that, yeah, he has that arc, right? What were you
yeah. And
gonna
of
say?
course, the gag when he gets, in the cement and he turns into a
Becomes the
gargoyle.
gargoyle. Right.
Right.
Everything just very, you know what I mean? It has these sincere character arcs
Yeah.
that aren't just silly. They actually mean something. I know that Chris Wallace was the guy that did the designs for the first Gremlins, and they didn't really. I thought it was funny because again, watching the with the Lenny, the Daffy, the George, and the Mohawk characters in this,
Yeah.
the first Gremlins didn't have personalities like that. They didn't have different faces. So Wallace, again, for the first movie, they were kind of tied with their budget. And then Chris Wallace, again, who's famous for doing the makeup effects in The Fly 2 years after, he decided to become a director. And around the time he was directing The Fly 2 is when they were making Gremlins 2. And so he couldn't come on board. And so Dante went to Rick Baker, who we've talked about, who did the makeup for Thriller, who did the makeup for Men in Black. We've talked about him before and how much we love him. But Rick Baker was like, I'm not going to be the second, but I'm not going to take over somebody else's work. Like I can't be second fiddle. But Dante was like, we've got a giant budget. You go to town. You create as many gremlins as you want. And I think again, if Dante treated this as a I hate sequels, I hate the first movie, I don't think that stuff would be I don't think that kind of care would be put into this movie. You know what I mean? You say
Yeah.
it's grosser. They were able to do bigger versions. When you have close-ups of the Gremlins, they're bigger versions. It's not just the doll. So
Yeah.
the Daffy character, when its eyes are going, I'm like, holy cow, like they wouldn't have been able to do that the first time to
Yeah.
be that had that kind of dexterity. When Gizmo is in that little drawer and Billy shoves the and it closes on his hand and he pops up and he's like, what the hell, man? Like he's obviously hurt, Gizmo, that kind of thing. There's an expression to his face. You know what I mean? There's
Yeah.
just a love and a care to this movie that would not be there if they were treating this as a joke.
Yeah, well, that was one of Rick Baker's he had to have that in his contract, I guess. He wanted to make more than one character. He has like,
Yeah.
well, if I'm gonna do this, I gotta be able to make more than one character.
It's got to be mine.
Yeah, it's gonna be
Like,
mine. I'm gonna do
yeah,
what I
yeah,
want. So they actually based some of these gremlins on characters who helped design them. So there was like, the Matt Gremlin or whatever they call them, what their names were.
yeah,
But also a funny story about Rick Baker is before he was going to decide to do the movie or not, he knew he needed a bigger space in order to make all these puppets and all these characters.
yeah,
So he needed a new space, and the space next door to him became for lease like the day he was going to decide whether or not he was going to do it. So he was like, was a sign from God that I need to say yes so I could like get this extra space to make these gremlins and make this movie.
yeah.
So it all kind of worked out at the last second, which is
Right.
kind of cool.
There's again, just the physical work in this is incredible. You can
Yeah.
tell they really use the budget. As far as the acting goes, you wanted to talk about that for a little bit.
Sure. Well, well, honestly, I love, is it Zach Gilligan? Is that his name?
Zach Galligan. Yep,
Galligan?
yep. Uh-huh.
Yeah. Yeah. And then I think he's fine. I thought it was kind of fun to recognize the redhead from she's not redheaded in 16 Candles,
Yeah.
but she's the blonde in 16 Candles. I was like, hey,
Evelyn Morris. Right, right,
that face.
right.
And then of course Phoebe Cates, I think she's really funny yeah, I just love her in this movie. But my favorite, the guy who steals the show for me, is John Glover as Daniel Clamp, I guess his
Mm-hmm.
name is
Yeah, yep.
the CEO
Mm-hmm.
character. I think it's funny because when you first meet him, you think he's going to be this like villain character, this bad guy, and you're kind of not sure who he's going to become. And by the end of the movie, he's just like super optimistic, like super like everything's
Yeah.
possible kind of guy. It's like I love that, I love that. So, and just his deliveries, his performance is so funny. He's for me the comic timing, and so I or the comedic. What do you call it? I forget.
Comic relief.
Comic relief. That's what he is for me.
But even he has an arc. I like the first scene with him is when he's talking to the I'm gonna keep calling him Kai Luke, Mr. Wing, right? They put the video of him. I like that he's talking with that big smile and the big like horse teeth. He's talking, but then there's a moment where he's done talking and he turns off and his facade fades and he looks to the side and he turns off and you can see that he's not sincere. Anything that he just said, he wasn't sincere. So you're kind of like you're thinking this is going to be the bad guy of the
Yeah.
movie, right? But he has that arc. I think it's Billy showing him and the Gremlins showing up and kind of help because he's bored in his office. There's that part where he's wandering around. He's, ooh, let's do some memos, that kind of thing. Like
Yeah.
he's dead inside, but this helps him live. I know that actually I'll come to that. I think that Zach Galligan and Phoebe Cates are great. They serve the purpose. I'm sad that Zach Galligan isn't in more stuff because I think he's a very everyman kind of guy.
hmm
Phoebe Cates is very, yeah, she has that good delivery with the Abraham Lincoln story, but she's, mousy and she's, quiet. But she also has these moments. I like when Billy's like, go get Gizmo, bring him back to our house. And she's like, no, no. Like she has that moment. I like when the Marla character comes back after their date and the next morning and she's talking to him and then she walks off and then Kate looks at Billy and says, if we get through today, you're in big trouble and walks off.
Yeah.
She has she's just very sweet and they play the parts like they're supposed to play them, right? There's nothing
Yeah.
really more to that. Like the Prosky character, Picardo is really funny. I like that he's
Yeah.
the put upon kind of guy and he's dealing. I like at the end it's like, oh, after all this I get half a day. That's very generous of you, that kind of thing. But yeah, John Glover, in our climate now, people are just going to be quick to say, "Oh, it's a Donald Trump ripoff," and yeah, that's it. Like even the book that Clamp has the same font as Trump's Art of the Deal, right? It's that, but Dante is always quick. That's the first thing that people do. Whenever people interview him or wherever they're talking to him, they will always bring up that it's Trump. That's low hanging fruit,
Right.
especially now that Trump is in office, right? But Dante is always quick to say, yeah, but that's the mogul Trump. That's before he became this. It's also Ted Turner. It's also the
Yeah.
mogul Ted Turner. Like he has
Sure.
the GNN or whatever, the CNN, the Clamp
Or
News
Rupert
Network.
Murdoch or
Yeah.
any of those guys.
And the Neil Ross voice, who again did voices in Transformers the movie, the announcer, some of the stuff that the announcer for the building will say is just really funny. Like, I need you to move like this car that has this license plate. We need you to move your car from the parking lot. It's old and dirty, that kind of thing. So again, it has that. And with the colorization, there's another line where it says, "We're going to show Casablanca tonight in color, but with a happier ending." That's
Yeah.
very Ted Turner, like Ted Turner, like so. Again, it's an amalgam of stuff, and the way that there's that great gag. I don't know if you spotted it. And in the first Gremlins, there's a lot of cool stuff where they'll do like the Texas switch, where they'll have something. It'll be Galligan holding the Gizmo puppet. He'll move it out of frame, but there will also already be a Gizmo puppet like below where the frame is. That's the main puppet, and they'll remove like the puppet that he was holding. There's a lot of that stuff.
Yeah, yeah,
There's a
yeah.
part in this where Glover, the Clamp character, is fighting. What a horrible gag where the gremlin puts that mouse trap in the secretary's sandwich, right? And the sound of it and her how she walks off and you can tell like her that's what a horrible gag, right? That's awful. But
Yeah.
when he comes out and the gremlin's fighting him and he's fighting it, you don't notice like again when Glover is holding that gremlin, he's actually controlling that gremlin. So that's a fake hand. That's just he's got one hand that's real but another that's fake because his real hand is underneath controlling the puppet. But you don't notice that until somebody
Yeah.
points it out.
Yeah.
I,
That's kind of what I love. I love that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, that's very movies, and it's not like so noticeable that you notice it the first time. But yeah, I mean the way that he's so positive, the shredder gag, the way they set that up, it's so
Oh yeah.
gross.
That's really gross.
But yeah, he becomes the gag with the end of the world tape, which is funny because that's based on an actual thing. I think Ted Turner actually created a tape for that specific moment that his channels can show. So that's even funny. It's funnier when you realize that's a real thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, that optimism, it's so funny when
He,
he's all in Billy's plan, that kind of
he
stuff.
used to use his secret like
Entrance. Right, right. And he's so happy about that. And then at the end, when he comes up with the SWAT guys and he can't get in the first door, can't get in the second door, and then he runs
yeah.
in and he slips on, just very funny.
Yeah,
A
really
lot
funny.
of that stuff just
Like I
rules.
say, every
So
time he's on screen, I'm laughing. It's a great time.
yeah.
Um, Also, I love Tony Randall as
Oh
the
my
voice of
gosh.
the smart, the genius gremlin. I think that's so funny. This guy right here.
Yeah, right. Oh, I just thought that was your regular ears.
And
Okay. I'm getting that.
he's like, what we want is civilization.
Well, let's just to kind of close out because I know we both love this movie. I was kind of on the fence 'cause you hadn't really talked about Gremlins before, and so I was
Well,
like,
it's not one that I'll go out my way to watch, but when I do watch it, I love it I love
yeah,
experience.
it's a
Yeah.
great reminder that it's out there, right? It's a
Yeah.
great joke fest. Um, just let's go over some of the gags and we'll kind of close it out that way,
Sure.
but we won't mention all of them. Talking about, I mean, let's do this. What are your favorite Gremlins? I think my favorite is the Tony Randall Gremlin. I just think it's so funny that he mutates, and the only thing that he mutates is he grows a pair of glasses.
Yeah.
That's so funny. And that is, was that by any means civilized? No, fun, but by no means
Yeah.
civilized, that kind of thing. I love that. I
Yeah.
like the Edward G. Robinson gremlin. Like you can tell when they're the fuzzy gremlins, you can tell exactly who they are when they become the real gremlins. I like that kind of connection. But what are some of the gremlins that you really
Well,
like?
I think it's funny that there's only one female gremlin and just happens to look like Lauren Bacall.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's funny.
Right.
But when I was a kid, I remember not liking that gremlin. I remember being like, "Oh, she's so ugly." You know
Yeah,
what I mean, but as an adult, it's really funny
right.
because you get the reference and everything. But yeah, I think I would agree with you. I think the smart gremlin's my favorite. I thought his name was Spike. It's not Spike. It's
Spike in the
called.
first one. It's Mohawk in this one.
Okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
I always liked the Spike or Mohawk ones. That was always my favorite one as a kid.
Yeah. The gags, poor Gizmo. When they're
Yeah.
like again, they torture him in the first one, they torture him in this one. It's what
It
is
is
it about that
sweet to
little
see him
puppet?
come back as Rambo though.
Yeah, we just that's his even Gizmo has a character arc where he
Yeah,
decides
yeah.
like maybe he's had enough, that kind of thing. I love again having Christopher Lee in the movie. That's the big get for me because it's keying you into all the like the Corman movies, the B movies, the monster movies that Christopher Lee's having a fun time. Like I like his first line with Julia Sweeney where she's like, "Oh, we got your malaria," and it's like, "Oh, this is rabies." Like I already got rabies. Or the line, I love the part where they're realizing that the gremlins are mutating, and he goes, "We can't let them get away. All they'd have to do is eat 3 or 4 children, and there'd be the most appalling publicity." I love all that. I love and I think the scene right after that is when Mr. and Mrs. Futterman are walking to the cathedral, and she goes, "It's the Cathedral of Saint Eva Marie," which is The actress Eva Marie Saint, I thought that was a really funny gag. Like, I don't know. Whenever I watch this movie, it's like you say, it's not like first and foremost in my mind. I think this might be in my top five sequels because I love the idea that it kind of takes the piss out of sequels
Yeah.
while being an actual great sequel. But whenever I do watch it, I do pick up on a lot more gags. I do laugh at a lot more stuff. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, you'll find something new every time you watch it because there's so much
Right.
going on. Yeah.
The when the Gremlins are I think that's a really cool idea because it is Billy's fault. Like brought Gizmo into the building. He's the one that started this whole thing. And again, that the Tati reference, the modern building, the exhibition that Hugh Lowe goes to see, and
Mhm.
the great gag when the glass door breaks and he's still holding the handle and people are grabbing the handle and he's moving it.
Yeah.
That is like the first Gremlins, like I said, was It's a Wonderful Life. This is playtime. It's kind of playing on all that stuff. I like that the Clamp building starts out already having gremlins in it, like problems with the
Yeah.
doors and with stuff
Right.
like that. And it's so modern. There's the part where the Forster character is telling Billy, I can't, why are we hiring all these great artists to give them their art? And you have this folksy kind of picture of your hometown, which again is when you look at that picture behind Forster, it's this very modern cubist kind of mechanical that's basically saying that there's no life to
Yeah.
these people in this building. And that's why Clamp, I think he comes out of a shell and he's like, yeah, like we're insured, it doesn't matter. Let's build again. Let's start fresh. Where life slows to a crawl, that
Yeah.
Clamp
Yeah.
corners, that kind of thing. So
What's he
I
say? It's
don't know.
gonna be the best, greatest small town, something like that. The biggest
Yeah,
small. I,
yeah, just really funny game. You can when the gremlins are melting and that stuff. There's all these funny stuff. I like the singing in the bathtub gremlin. I like the I'm melting. What a world, what a world. The Wicked Witch gremlin.
it's a pretty, easy one.
Yeah. But
But yeah.
you can find all these background gags that I just think are just really funny. And one of the great background gags is that archery channel. I love when they pass by and there's a guy dressed as Robin Hood and he comes out and he breaks his arrow, which he didn't have to do that, but I just think it's a funny little gag that's just in there.
Yeah.
There's not a moment in this like if there's a gag, Dante will go for it. You know what I mean? And it has that spirit to it. This let's try anything on. Let's see if this works. And yeah, Spielberg is over this. Yeah, he's I think the thing with the Santa Claus story is there was the Warner Brothers wanted it out, and Dante really wanted it in, and Spielberg was like, "Well, if you want it in, it's going to stay in, right?" I know that Spielberg just oversees a lot of the stuff, but I think he feeds people's creativity. I
Well, I
think,
also think he understands other directors and what
yeah,
they're, passionate about, their vision. So he understands other directors because he's a director
exactly
himself. So
right, and that's why you have Gremlins 2, Inner Space, all produced by
now, isn't there
Spielberg.
going to be a Gremlins 3?
I think that's the rumor that came back. I think Chris Columbus is saying something about that. Don't you think it's going to be weird to go from the first one, which is a horror kind of spoof in a way, but then full on comedy, making fun of sequels, and then going back and making the third one? I think that kind of defeats the purpose, especially if
I
Dante
think
doesn't direct it.
I think if they're thinking CGI, it'll just ruin it. So
Yeah. Yeah, that's probably what they'll end up doing.
and they'll keep the practical, in-camera effects with the puppets and everything.
Right, right. Again, just a great gag-filled movie. I know I called it a spoof during our Explorers episode, but what I really latched onto this time, it's the idea of let's take the piss out of sequels. Sequels are just a relatively dumb idea. There's no point. We're teaching people that stories don't end. Like there's no closure is what people are. And so Gremlins 2 exists as this movie that's kind of like, yeah, the idea of sequels is stupid, but let's have fun. If we're gonna make a sequel, the hell with it. Let's just make this the
Yeah,
sequel.
yeah, and they definitely went there. They went all out on this one. So
Yeah. So
yeah,
again, it's funny saying that Inner Space is my favorite when I love Gremlins 2 this much. You know what I
yeah,
mean? So again, like I said, Dante's a very surface director, but the surface is just so fun that it's hard to fault him for not being deeper than that. I don't know if that makes any sense.
yeah, that makes total sense.
Okay. So I mean, I'm looking at my notes. I think that's all I have on this great, wonderful meta joke of a movie. I mean, anything else that you had to say about it?
No, I don't think so. I think that's it. Um, yeah.
Okay. All right. So Gremlins 2, again, very, very highly recommended. Yeah, if you're pushing back on it and think that the jokes are too meta, stuff like that, just have another look and just jive with the spirit of it. It's great. So
Yeah.
that'll close out our conversation on this movie. What do you want to do? What's your idea for our next movie?
Well, we're still in 1990, and so my second choice for this year is going to be Lord of the Flies.
Ah. Okay.
And again, it's a movie that just hit me when I was young and just stayed with me for
Okay.
forever. So I can't wait to revisit it.
Okay. I've actually never seen it. I've read the book in school, the Golding book, but
Okay.
I've actually never seen the 1990 movie. So that'll be a fun
Yeah.
conversation. So we'll see how I feel about it, I guess.
All right.
Anyway, but again, we'll close this. Lord of the Flies will be our next episode. Looking forward to chatting with you again. I'm having a fun time with this bucket list season. Wanted to talk about You want to talk about Total Recall. I've wanted to talk about Gremlins too. Let's just keep this ball rolling. But until then, until we meet you again, for NostalgiaCast, I'm Darren Lumberg.
And I'm Johnny Craddock.
And the city's so nice, they named it twice. Have a look, why don't you?
Was that civilized? No. Fun, but not civilized.